The skies darkened over Chicago that Tuesday morning in 2028, not with storm clouds, but with the massive silhouettes of alien vessels that seemed to materialize from nowhere. They came without warning, without diplomatic overtures, just the sudden, terrifying presence of technology beyond human comprehension. Within hours, the extraterrestrial invasion had systematically dismantled Earth's power grids, communications, networks, and defense systems with surgical precision. Military bases worldwide reported their weapons systems failing simultaneously, leaving humanity essentially defenseless against these visitors who called themselves legislators. The name itself carried an ominous weight. These beings hadn't come to negotiate or learn, but to impose their will, to rewrite the very laws of human existence. Panic swept through cities as darkness fell in the middle of the day. Artificial darkness as satellites were disabled and electromagnetic pulses rendered every electronic device useless. The systematic alien domination began with precision strikes against key infrastructure, leaving humanity stumbling blindly without the technology we'd become so dependent upon. President Hernandez addressed the nation via emergency broadcast systems, powered by the invaders themselves, a final humiliation as she announced the unconditional surrender of the United States government. Similar scenes played out across the globe as nation after nation capitulated, their military forces rendered obsolete against weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. The legislators had done their homework. They knew exactly where to strike, how to disable, and most importantly, how to break the human spirit. In the aftermath of what became known as Darkness Day, the legislators revealed their true intentions. They hadn't come to annihilate humanity, but to subjugate it, a distinction that offered little comfort to the billions now living under totalitarian control. The aliens established their headquarters in what was once the United Nations building, a symbolic choice that mockingly echoed humanity's failed attempts at global cooperation. From this command center, they issued their first proclamation. All human militaries would be dissolved immediately, and a new human police force would be established, answering directly to legislator overseers. Those who resisted would face immediate consequences, a threat demonstrated with horrifying efficiency when Melbourne, Australia, attempted its short-lived rebellion. The alien repression came swiftly as Melbourne burned, a warning to the rest of humanity about the cost of defiance. Surveillance devices, seemingly organic in nature, appeared overnight in every major city, floating silently at intersections, hovering outside windows, constantly monitoring for signs of insurgency. The extraterrestrial oppression transformed once bustling metropolises into silent, fearful places where neighbors avoided eye contact and conversations were conducted in whispers. The legislators didn't need to understand human language to recognize the tone of resistance, the subtle body language of conspiracy. Their monitoring systems detected patterns, anomalies in behavior that triggered immediate police response. Within weeks, the first human informants emerged, trading information for small privileges, further fracturing community trust. Human police forces, now bearing the insignia of their alien masters, patrolled the streets with legislator technology, augmenting their capabilities. These officers faced an impossible choice: enforce alien rule or watch their families face retribution. Many justified their collaboration as necessary for maintaining some semblance of human dignity within the system, believing that human oversight, however limited, was better than direct alien control. Others embraced the new power structure with disturbing enthusiasm, using their positions to settle old grudges or accumulate what little privilege the new system allowed. The global rebellion that many had expected never materialized. How could it, when every electronic message was intercepted, every gathering monitored, every weapon neutralized before it could be deployed? The systematic dismantling of human autonomy extended beyond security measures. Schools reopened with heavily revised curricula, emphasizing legislator philosophy and the benefits of alien rule, while methodically erasing human history. Children were taught that the invasion had saved humanity from its own destructive tendencies, that the aliens had arrived just in time to prevent ecological collapse and nuclear war. This carefully constructed narrative portrayed human freedom as a dangerous experiment that had nearly destroyed the planet, a failed system rightfully replaced by legislator guidance. With each passing month, the aliens tightened their strategic stranglehold on Earth's resources, establishing processing facilities that extracted minerals and biologicals for purposes unknown, using human labor under constant surveillance. Within 6 months, specialized tracking devices were implanted in every human being, small, seemingly inorganic chips inserted at the base of the skull that monitored location, vital signs, and according to some whispers, even basic emotional states. The procedure was mandatory, performed by human doctors under alien supervision, with immediate extermination as the consequence for refusal. These implants created an unprecedented level of totalitarian control, allowing the legislators to instantly identify any human, track their movements, and monitor their associations. Public resistance had become virtually impossible, but in the shadows, in whispered conversations and furtive glances, the first sparks of human rebellion began to flicker, kept alive by those willing to risk everything for the faint hope of freedom. Jack Drummond had once believed in the system, in the thin blue line between order and chaos. As a Chicago detective with 20 years on the force, he'd seen humanity at its worst, but nothing had prepared him for watching his colleagues become enforcers for an alien regime. The day they fitted his police uniform with legislator monitoring technology was the day Jack decided to escape with his family. Their plan had been months in the making. Forged documents, carefully mapped routes avoiding checkpoints, supplies gathered one inconspicuous purchase at a time. But as their vehicle approached the outer perimeter of Chicago's closed zone, something triggered the aliens' security system. The last thing Jack saw before losing consciousness was his wife's face illuminated by alien weapons fire, her eyes wide with a horror that would haunt his dreams for years to come, if the rebellion against their inhuman oppressors allowed him the luxury of sleeping at all. The transformation of Earth's major cities into closed zones happened with frightening efficiency, almost as if the legislators had blueprints prepared long before their arrival. Chicago, once a sprawling metropolitan area, was now encircled by towering walls of unknown material. Not concrete or steel, but something that seemed to absorb both light and sound, creating an eerie boundary between the confined human population and the outside world. Similar structures appeared around New York, Tokyo, London, Mumbai, and dozens of other population centers, turning them into massive open-air prisons. The walls weren't merely physical barriers, they contained advanced security systems that could detect and neutralize any escape attempt. Rumors spread of people who had tried to breach these walls, only to disintegrate upon contact or simply vanish without a trace, fueling the atmosphere of fear and hopelessness that characterized humanity's new existence under alien oppression. Inside these confined spaces, daily life underwent a radical restructuring as humanity faced systematic suppression of basic freedoms. The aliens divided each closed zone into sectors, assigning humans to specific living and working areas with color-coded identification badges that restricted movement between zones. Public gatherings of more than 5 people became illegal without explicit legislator approval, effectively dismantling religious services, cultural celebrations, and even family reunions. The alien domination extended into homes, where mandatory communication ports were installed, sleek oval devices that looked harmless but constantly monitored conversations for keywords that might indicate resistance. Citizens learned to speak in coded language, developing a complex system of euphemisms and double meanings that they hoped might evade the constant monitoring, though few truly believed they could outsmart legislator technology. The most visible aspect of the new order was the massive construction projects that began in every closed zone. Human labor crews, working under the watchful eyes of both alien overseers and human police, excavated enormous underground complexes. The purpose of these structures remained classified, but workers who returned from their 14-hour shifts whispered about strange machinery, chambers filled with unidentifiable equipment, and areas where humans were forbidden to enter. These projects consumed enormous resources and manpower, with buses departing daily from residential sectors to construction sites where totalitarian control was enforced with brutal efficiency. Workers who failed to meet quotas faced reduced rations or reassignment to even more dangerous tasks, while those who excelled received the dubious reward of additional food or medicine for their families, turning basic necessities into privileges to be earned through submission. All digital communication infrastructure had been dismantled in the first days of the invasion, replaced with the legislators' own controlled networks. Internet access no longer existed. Instead, a limited intranet operated within each closed zone, providing only approved information and propaganda. Telephones functioned solely for reporting emergencies or suspected resistance activities to authorities. This communication blackout completed humanity's isolation. Not only were people physically confined within walled cities, but they had no way of knowing what was happening elsewhere on their own planet. The aliens strategically controlled information flow, releasing carefully crafted news broadcasts that highlighted the benefits of legislator rule, while featuring public executions of captured rebels as warnings against insurgency. The message was clear. Resistance was not merely futile, but catastrophically dangerous to anyone who dared attempt it. The human police force became the most visible extension of alien authority, their black uniforms and red armbands marking them as collaborators in the eyes of many citizens. Yet the reality was more complex. Many officers had joined to protect their families from worse fates, or believed they could mitigate some of the harshest aspects of alien rule from within the system. Others, however, embraced their new power with disturbing enthusiasm, using their positions to settle old grudges or accumulate what few privileges the new system allowed. Their enhanced weapons and authority made them feared figures in every sector, able to conduct random searches, impose curfews, or detain citizens indefinitely based on mere suspicion. The constant police repression turned neighbors into potential informants, as reporting suspicious activity became one of the few ways to curry favor with authorities and perhaps secure better treatment. Food distribution became another mechanism of control, with centralized ration stations replacing grocery stores and markets. Citizens lined up daily with their identification cards to receive precisely calculated portions based on their work assignments and compliance history. The legislators had studied human nutrition with scientific precision, providing exactly what was needed for survival and labor capacity. No more, no less. Luxury items vanished entirely. Coffee, chocolate, and alcohol became distant memories, spoken of with nostalgic longing during rare moments when people dared to reminisce about life before the extraterrestrial invasion. Gardens were prohibited in residential areas, preventing any attempt at self-sufficiency, and unauthorized food sharing between families could result in reduced rations for entire housing blocks, a policy specifically designed to turn hunger into a weapon against human solidarity. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of the legislators' rule was how quickly it normalized. Children born after the invasion grew up knowing nothing else, educated in schools where alien philosophy was presented, as scientific fact in human history was methodically rewritten. They learned that the invasion had saved humanity from its own destructive tendencies, that freedom was dangerous chaos, rightfully replaced by legislator guidance. The younger generation viewed human resistance fighters not as heroes, but as terrorists, threatening the stability that kept their families safe. This generational divide created another fracture in humanity's ability to unify against their oppressors. Parents watched in silent horror as their children recited legislator principles with genuine conviction, unable to correct this indoctrination without risking being reported by their own offspring, who had been taught that loyalty to the regime superseded all family ties. 7 years into the occupation, life under alien domination had settled into a grim routine for most survivors. The initial shock had faded into a dull resignation, a collective learned helplessness reinforced by the seemingly omnipotent surveillance and overwhelming technological superiority of their oppressors. Yet beneath this apparent submission, something unexpected was happening in the human spirit. In hidden corners of closed zones, in hushed conversations during power outages, in coded messages passed hand to hand rather than electronically, sparks of defiance still flickered. The resilience that had carried humanity through ice ages, plagues, and wars had not been entirely extinguished. Small acts of rebellion, a forbidden book preserved, a secretly maintained radio, a symbol scratched, into a wall. These became precious tokens of hope. And somewhere in the shadows, a more organized resistance was forming. One that would soon reveal that humanity's fight for freedom was far from over, despite the seemingly invincible extraterrestrial oppression that had transformed Earth into a planet-sized prison camp. The first organized resistance against the legislators emerged not with a bang, but with a whisper, coded messages exchanged in breadlines, symbols etched into alley walls, and meaningful glances between those brave enough to question their new reality. These seemingly insignificant acts formed the foundation of what would eventually become known as the Phoenix Movement, named for humanity's mythical ability to rise from its own ashes. The insurgency began with small acts of sabotage, damaged equipment at construction sites, misplaced tools, or work deliberately performed incorrectly to delay alien projects. These actions were careful, measured, more symbolic than strategic, yet they represented something the legislators had not anticipated: the inexhaustible human capacity for hope, even in the face of overwhelming oppression. The aliens had studied human history, human biology, human technology, but they had fundamentally misunderstood the human spirit, that intangible quality that had allowed our species to survive ice ages, plagues, and our own destructive tendencies across millennia of existence. The human rebellion gained structure through the efforts of former military personnel, scientists, engineers, and others with specialized skills who had survived the initial invasion. Operating in cells of no more than 5 people, with each cell knowing only one contact from another group, they created a network that was difficult to completely dismantle even when members were captured and interrogated. Their methods were necessarily primitive in a world where all electronic communication was monitored. Handwritten notes, predetermined meeting locations, and messenger systems reminiscent of ancient spy networks. The legislators' totalitarian control of technology had forced humanity to rediscover older methods of coordinating resistance, ways of operating that predated digital surveillance. Ironically, by stripping humans of their technology, the aliens had pushed them to rely on methods their monitoring systems weren't primarily designed to detect. The extraterrestrial dominance had created an unexpected vulnerability in their own security apparatus. Jack Drummond never intended to become a key figure in the human resistance movement. After the brutal extermination of his wife during their failed escape attempt, he had focused solely on ensuring the survival of his twin sons, Raphael and Gabriel. For months after the incident, Jack had played the role of the compliant citizen, the broken man who had learned his lesson about defying legislator authority. He reported for his shifts with the police force, enforced alien regulations, and kept his head down, all while secretly teaching his sons about the world that existed before the extraterrestrial invasion, preserving human history despite the systematic erasure efforts underway in schools. It was Raphael who first brought home the Phoenix symbol, sketched on a scrap of paper passed to him by a classmate. When Jack recognized it as a resistance marker, his immediate reaction was fear, followed by the first stirring of something he'd thought had died with his wife: hope for a future beyond alien oppression. Jack's decision to contact the resistance came after witnessing the public execution of a former colleague who had refused to participate in a raid on a suspected rebel hideout. The man's final words before the alien device disintegrated him, "Remember who we are," echoed in Jack's mind for days afterward. Using his position within the police force, he began deliberately misclassifying reports of suspicious activity, subtly protecting resistance operations while appearing to zealously enforce legislator directives. This delicate balancing act continued for months until a raid revealed his duplicity. With his cover blown and alien retribution imminent, Jack made the desperate decision to flee with his sons, guided by resistance contacts, toward a rumored safe zone beyond Chicago's walls. Their escape attempt became a legendary tale within resistance circles, not because it succeeded, but because of its catastrophic failure and the extraordinary sacrifice it represented in the ongoing fight against extraterrestrial domination. The ambush came at the outer perimeter of the closed zone. Jack had been promised that the security systems would be temporarily disabled, but either the information was wrong or they had been betrayed. Alien weapons fire illuminated the night, as Jack pushed his sons ahead toward the narrow tunnel that would lead them beyond the wall. "Run and don't look back," were his final instructions as he turned to face their pursuers, buying precious seconds with his life. Raphael and Gabriel crawled through the maintenance tunnel as the sounds of battle faded behind them, emerging on the other side forever changed by what they had witnessed. The 14-year-old twins had lost everything to the alien oppression, their mother, their home, and now their father, leaving them with nothing but each other and a burning hatred for the creatures that had destroyed their world and millions of others through their relentless totalitarian control. The brothers' paths diverged in the aftermath of their escape, their different responses to trauma shaping their roles in humanity's struggle. Raphael, consumed by rage and a thirst for retribution, sought out the most militant faction of the resistance, eventually becoming one of the Phoenix Movement's most effective and ruthless operatives. His strategic mind and unflinching willingness to make difficult choices made him both respected and feared within resistance circles. Gabriel, equally scarred but differently expressed, retreated inward. He focused on survival, on keeping his head down, on building a life in the shadows while minimizing interaction with both the alien regime and the resistance fighters whose actions often brought swift and terrible retaliation against innocent civilians. Yet despite his attempts to remain uninvolved, Gabriel's family connection to the resistance made him a person of interest to the authorities, particularly as Raphael's reputation grew among both rebels and legislators alike. The early resistance efforts were largely symbolic, more expressions of defiance than serious attempts to overthrow the alien regime. Resistance fighters spray-painted Phoenix symbols on legislator monuments, distributed handwritten pamphlets containing uncensored news, and occasionally sabotaged alien equipment, actions that demonstrated humanity's refusal to be completely subjugated but did little to threaten actual extraterrestrial dominance. The turning point came 3 years after the invasion, when a resistance cell in what had once been Berlin managed to capture and dissect a legislator drone. The technology was beyond complete human understanding, but the examination revealed something unexpected. The drones operated on a centralized network rather than functioning independently. This discovery suggested a potential vulnerability. If the control center could be located and disabled, even temporarily, it might create an opportunity for more significant resistance operations against the seemingly invincible alien monitoring systems that had made widespread rebellion impossible. The systematic sabotage campaign that followed targeted communication relays and monitoring stations, carefully coordinated across multiple closed zones to prevent the aliens from identifying a pattern. These were high-risk operations, with brutal consequences when discovered. Entire city blocks subjected to cleansing procedures when resistance activity was detected, a euphemism for the systematic extermination of all residents, regardless of their involvement. The human cost was devastating, leading to intense debate within resistance leadership about the morality of actions that triggered such indiscriminate alien retribution. Some argued that the struggle for freedom required sacrifice. Others maintained that victory would be meaningless if it came at the cost of the very humanity they were fighting to preserve. This philosophical divide created fractures within the movement, with some factions favoring more cautious approaches, while others pushed for increasingly aggressive insurgency tactics against the oppressive extraterrestrial regime. 7 years into the occupation, the resistance had evolved from scattered acts of defiance into a sophisticated underground network spanning multiple closed zones, communicating through couriers, dead drops, and encoded messages hidden in seemingly innocent objects. They had developed techniques to temporarily disable tracking implants, allowing limited freedom of movement for key operatives. Their most significant achievement was establishing a rudimentary radio communication system using pre-digital technology that the aliens had largely ignored as obsolete. Crystal radio sets that required no power source and could receive broadcasts from resistance transmitters hidden in the devastated areas between closed zones. Through these broadcasts, the scattered pockets of human rebellion maintained coordination and, perhaps more importantly, sustained the crucial belief that they were not alone in their fight against alien oppression. As the resistance grew in sophistication and strategic capability, The legislators responded with increasingly draconian security measures, creating a cycle of escalation that would eventually force both sides toward a confrontation that would determine the future of humanity on its own planet. The year 2035 marked the 7th anniversary of what historians now simply called the Arrival, a sterile term that masked the horror of humanity's subjugation under alien rule. Chicago's Zone 7, once known as the vibrant neighborhood of Lincoln Park, had transformed into a model of legislator efficiency. Identical housing blocks, methodically arranged streets patrolled by hovering surveillance drones, and citizens moving with the cautious precision of prey animals aware they were constantly being watched. The tracking devices implanted at the base of every human skull had become more sophisticated with each mandatory upgrade, now monitoring not just location and vital signs, but also detecting unusual patterns in movement, sleep, and even gaze. Duration. Staring too long at a government building or a legislator transport was enough to trigger an automated security response. Children born after the Arrival received their implants within hours of birth, their tiny bodies marked for lifelong monitoring before they had taken their first steps under Earth's now foreign sky. The totalitarian control had permeated so deeply into daily life that many younger citizens couldn't conceptualize a world without the constant extraterrestrial surveillance that defined their existence. William Mulligan observed the morning crowd from his office window, 17 stories above Chicago's Central Processing District. His enhanced police uniform, uncomfortable against his skin, even after years of wearing it. As Chief Inspector of Counterinsurgency Operations, his position granted him a level of autonomy unusual within the human enforcement structure, a privilege earned through 7 years of demonstrated loyalty to the legislator regime and an unmatched record of dismantling resistance cells. His apartment included luxuries denied to ordinary citizens: real coffee, private quarters without monitoring devices, aside from his own implant, and access to restricted areas of the closed zone. These privileges came at a price that extended beyond his obvious collaboration. Each night, alone in his quarters, Mulligan meticulously documented his actions in a journal hidden beneath his floorboards, not out of vanity or record-keeping compulsion, but as evidence for the war crimes. Tribunal, he believed, would someday judge him if humanity ever managed to overthrow the alien domination that had transformed Earth into a planet-sized prison camp. The morning briefing brought news of another Phoenix cell discovered and neutralized in Sector 12. 17 resistance members captured, their families already processed for relocation, a euphemism everyone understood but no one acknowledged. Mulligan's expression remained impassive as his deputy Chen detailed the operation's success with undisguised pride. "We've identified a potential connection to other cells," Chen explained, projecting a holographic map that highlighted surveillance anomalies across 3 sectors. Pattern recognition suggests these deviations may indicate message drop locations. Mulligan nodded approvingly while making a mental note to warn his resistance contacts about the compromised routes. Another entry for the hidden journal, another betrayal of his oath to the legislators. Another small act of rebellion hidden behind his carefully constructed facade of absolute loyalty to the extraterrestrial regime that had granted him power specifically because they believed him incapable of such duplicity. The subject that most concerned Mulligan's alien supervisors was Gabriel Drummond, whose brother Raphael had become something of a legend among resistance fighters. Although Gabriel had maintained a low profile since his escape from Chicago 7 years earlier, recent intelligence placed him back in the closed zone, living under an assumed identity in a worker housing block in Sector 9. His file indicated no direct involvement with resistance activities, but his familial connection to one of the most wanted insurgents made him a person of significant interest. "We believe monitoring him will eventually lead us to his brother," explained the legislator overseer, its translucent appendages manipulating the holographic display with unsettling precision. "Your team will maintain constant surveillance without apprehension until contact is made." Mulligan accepted the assignment with the appropriate show of enthusiasm, fully aware that the case represented both extreme danger and extraordinary opportunity for his own deeply hidden agenda against the oppressive alien regime. Gabriel Drummond had never intended to return to Chicago. For 7 years, he had carefully maintained his distance from both the resistance and the authorities, working menial jobs in smaller closed zones, where surveillance was less intense and facial recognition systems less comprehensive. The message that had drawn him back, a cryptic note bearing the Phoenix symbol and coordinates for a rendezvous, had arrived via an elderly courier who died of apparently natural causes minutes after delivery, leaving Gabriel with questions that could only be answered by walking willingly into what might well be a trap. The resistance recruitment attempt that followed had been amateurish and suspicious, lacking the security protocols his brother had described in their infrequent communications over the years. When the recruitment meeting was raided by police, Gabriel barely escaped, his suspicions confirmed, but his purpose in returning to Chicago unfulfilled. He still didn't know whether his brother had actually sent for him, or if his name was being used to lure former resistance associates into the open. The network of surveillance devices throughout Chicago's closed zone had evolved from the relatively simple monitors of the early occupation into an integrated system of unprecedented sophistication. Microscopic cameras embedded in walls, streetlights, and even within the synthetic fabric of citizen uniforms created an omnipresent observation grid. Facial recognition algorithms continuously tracked movement patterns, identifying and flagging behaviors that deviated from established norms. Aerial drones disguised as indigenous birds or insects provided additional monitoring coverage, particularly in areas where architectural features created blind spots in the fixed surveillance network. Most insidious were the human informants, citizens who reported suspicious activities in exchange for extra rations or improved living assignments, creating an atmosphere where neighbors viewed each other with constant suspicion. This comprehensive monitoring system made meaningful resistance operations virtually impossible, forcing the Phoenix movement to adopt increasingly desperate measures in their struggle against the seemingly invincible extraterrestrial domination. The resistance had responded to enhanced surveillance with ingenious countermeasures that exploited the few blind spots in the legislators' monitoring systems. They discovered that certain natural materials, particularly a combination of copper, lead, and a specific clay found near Lake Michigan, could temporarily interfere with tracking implants when applied directly to the skin at the implantation site. The effect lasted only hours and often triggered health alarms if used too frequently, but it provided crucial windows for clandestine meetings. They communicated using pre-digital technology, hand-drawn maps, mechanical typewriters, and message systems based on physical dead drops rather than electronic transmission. Most importantly, they had developed a culture of patience, the understanding that meaningful action against the alien oppression required months or even years of preparation for moments of opportunity measured in minutes or seconds. This methodical approach frustrated younger members who demanded immediate action but had proven essential to the movement's survival in an environment where a single mistake could lead to the extermination of entire cell networks and their extended families. The most significant development in the Resistance's fight against extraterrestrial control came from an unexpected source, a legislator scientist who had apparently defected, providing crucial information through intermediaries before being discovered and eliminated by its own kind. The information, smuggled through 5 different couriers before reaching Phoenix leadership, contained detailed specifications for the central monitoring system that coordinated Chicago's surveillance network. According to these specifications, the entire system reset for exactly 7 seconds every 30 days, an interval designed for data consolidation that represented the only predictable interruption in the otherwise continuous alien surveillance. The reset would not disable tracking implants or physical monitoring devices, but it would temporarily sever their connection to the central database, creating a brief window when anomalous movement might go unrecorded. This information, if accurate, offered the first real opportunity for a coordinated action of meaningful scale against the alien regime, a momentary blind spot in their otherwise perfect system of oppressive monitoring and totalitarian control. The Chicago Tribune, or what passed for it under legislator censorship, had transformed from a venerable newspaper into little more than a propaganda sheet, its pages filled with production quotas, announcements of new regulations, and carefully sanitized news that invariably portrayed the alien occupation in a positive light. Yet for those who knew where to look, hidden messages pulsed beneath the surface of this seemingly innocuous publication. The resistance had infiltrated the printing facility 6 months earlier, inserting operatives who had perfected the art of embedding coded communications within the regime-approved text. A classified advertisement seeking pre-arrival furniture might indicate a safe house location. An obituary for a non-existent person could signal the fate of a captured operative. Even the arrangement of certain articles on specific pages created patterns recognizable only to those trained to see them. William Mulligan had discovered this communication system not through counterinsurgency brilliance, but because he himself had helped design it, a fact known to only 3 other living humans, none of whom suspected the true nature of his complex game against their alien oppressors. The coded message that caught Mulligan's attention that particular morning seemed innocuous enough. A notice about water rationing in Sector 12 scheduled for Tuesday. To the trained eye, however, the specific wording indicated something far more significant. The Resistance was planning an operation coinciding with the next monitoring system reset just 4 days away. As Chief Inspector, Mulligan immediately ordered increased surveillance in the identified sector, knowing his alien superiors would expect nothing less. Simultaneously, through channels known only to the highest levels of the Phoenix movement, he passed warnings about heightened security while confirming that the operation should proceed as planned. The constant double game exhausted him, maintaining the facade of the regime's most loyal enforcer while secretly coordinating its opposition required a compartmentalization of self that sometimes left him unsure where his true identity resided. The totalitarian control he helped maintain by day was the same system he worked to undermine by night, creating a psychological strain that manifested in chronic insomnia and increasingly frequent momentary lapses in his carefully maintained persona. Gabriel Drummond had spent 3 weeks working at the central distribution facility, having secured the position through forged work assignments, a serious risk given the facility's importance to the legislator supply chain. His job sorting synthetic food components for delivery throughout the closed zone was mind-numbing but provided exactly what he needed. Access to delivery schedules and routing information that might help explain why he'd been summoned back to Chicago. The other workers kept their distance, eyes downcast, conversations minimal. Standard behavior in high-security installations, where association with the wrong person could trigger invasive scrutiny from extraterrestrial authorities always seeking signs of insurgency. It was therefore unusual when Eliza Keene, a quiet woman who operated one of the tracking computers, deliberately brushed against him during shift change, leaving a small piece of paper in his pocket with a deftness that spoke of practice. The note contained just 5 numbers, but Gabriel immediately recognized their significance. Coordinates within the closed zone, using the resistance mapping system his brother had taught him years ago. That evening, after reporting for his mandatory recreation period, 90 minutes of approved activities designed to maintain physical functionality without providing opportunities for unauthorized gathering, Gabriel made his way toward the location indicated in the note. The route required 4 transfers on the automated transit system, each one taking him through progressively lower-rated sectors where surveillance remained omnipresent but less sophisticated due to resource allocation priorities established by the legislators. His heart pounded against his ribcage as he exited the final transit car, the weight of the tracking implant at the base of his skull seeming to grow heavier with each step toward what could easily be a trap set by authorities who had identified him and were using him as bait to draw out other resistance members. The alternative possibility that this was legitimate contact from the movement his brother had helped build seemed almost equally dangerous, given Gabriel's carefully maintained distance from resistance activities throughout the long years of alien oppression. The location turned out to be a small repair shop specializing in the maintenance of household monitoring devices, a profession that granted its practitioners limited access to legislator technology and thus required special certification and extensive background checks. The elderly proprietor barely glanced at Gabriel before pointing toward a back room cluttered with disassembled communication ports and surveillance components. "Your timing unit needs recalibration," the man stated flatly, using the established cover phrase for resistance meetings. Gabriel hesitated only momentarily before replying with the current authentication response. The original calibration served its purpose. The exchange complete, the old man activated a device that produced a low-frequency hum, a homemade signal disruptor that would create static in the audio feeds from any nearby surveillance equipment, providing limited privacy for conversation, without triggering the more serious alarm that would result from complete signal interruption. "She'll be with you shortly," the man said, returning to the front of the shop to maintain appearances of normal business operations under the watchful eyes of the extraterrestrial monitoring systems. Eliza arrived minutes later, her movements precise and efficient as she closed the door behind her. "We have exactly 3 minutes before the disruption pattern becomes detectable," she explained without preamble. "Your brother sent me. The rumors are true. The legislators are planning something big, something that goes beyond maintaining control of Earth. The facility beneath Sector 8 isn't just for resource processing. It's a dimensional gateway." Gabriel stared at her, struggling to process information that sounded more like desperate fantasy than actionable intelligence. Eliza continued urgently. "We've intercepted communications suggesting they're bringing something through. Not more of their kind, but something else entirely. Raphael believes this is the opportunity we've been waiting for, a moment when their attention will be divided." She pressed a small object into Gabriel's hand, a data storage device of pre-arrival design, deliberately primitive to avoid detection. By systems designed to identify more advanced technology, everything's here. The plan, your role, the timing. Memorize it and destroy it within 12 hours. The information on the storage device seemed impossible, audacious to the point of suicide, yet meticulously planned with the strategic precision Gabriel recognized from his brother's military training. The Resistance had identified the next reset of the monitoring system as their window of opportunity, a 5.7-second blind spot that would allow specific operatives to access restricted areas without triggering immediate alarms. Gabriel's role was relatively simple but crucial. His position at the distribution facility granted him access to routing systems that, if manipulated correctly, would create a cascading failure in supply deliveries to key security checkpoints, forcing personnel reassignments that would leave certain areas temporarily vulnerable. The operation involved dozens of operatives positioned throughout the closed zone, each performing seemingly unrelated actions that would align during those precious 5.7 seconds to create an opportunity for a primary team to infiltrate the mysterious facility beneath Sector 8. What they would do once inside remained classified. Gabriel's clearance within the Resistance hierarchy wasn't high enough to access that information. A security protocol that protected the overall operation in case any individual was captured and subjected to legislator interrogation techniques. After destroying the storage device as instructed, Gabriel found himself in the uncomfortable position of knowing just enough to understand the danger, but not enough to evaluate the plan's feasibility. Years of cautious survival instincts urged him to disappear, to fabricate new identity documents, and transfer to another closed zone before the operation commenced. Yet another part of him, perhaps the part that shared DNA with his rebel brother, felt a growing conviction that continued survival under alien dominance was becoming indistinguishable from a slow death of the human spirit. He observed his fellow workers shuffling through their assigned tasks, eyes vacant, conversations empty of anything but the most immediate concerns, humanity reduced to biological machines serving extraterrestrial masters. The sight strengthened his resolve, pushing him past hesitation toward commitment to the Resistance plan, despite its risks. The human rebellion against overwhelming odds was not merely about survival, but about reclaiming the dignity of self-determination that the alien invasion had systematically stripped away through its program of totalitarian control and constant monitoring. Later that night, as curfew sirens wailed across Chicago's closed zone, Gabriel stood at the window of his assigned housing unit, watching the ever-present surveillance drones making their programmed patrol patterns against the darkening sky. Each drone represented a reminder of humanity's subjugation, each mechanical eye an extension of the alien oppression that had transformed Earth into a prison planet for its native species. Yet for the first time in 7 years, Gabriel felt something beyond resignation and carefully managed survival, a dangerous emotion he had systematically suppressed since witnessing his father's sacrifice. Hope. The resistance plan might fail. The odds certainly suggested it would. But its very existence, the intricate coordination it represented, the willingness of dozens of individuals to risk execution to strike even a symbolic blow against their extraterrestrial oppressors, these things testified to something the legislators had failed to exterminate, despite their seemingly invincible technological superiority and strategies of totalitarian control. The human spirit of rebellion remained alive. A flickering flame passed from hand to hand in the darkness of alien domination, waiting for the right moment to ignite into something that even the masters of interstellar travel and advanced monitoring systems would be unable to contain. The Phoenix Resistance had never attempted anything of this magnitude before. An operation involving over 50 operatives across 7 sectors, all coordinated to converge during a public celebration that would mark the 7th anniversary of what the legislators euphemistically called unification. The Chicago Stadium, formerly Soldier Field, had been repurposed as the ceremonial center for such events, its massive structure modified with alien technology to accommodate both human attendees and their extraterrestrial overlords. Planning for the operation had consumed months, with Raphael Drummond personally overseeing every detail from his hidden command center in the abandoned underground network beneath the city. The resistance had slowly infiltrated key positions: maintenance workers, security personnel, even performers in the carefully choreographed spectacle designed to showcase the supposed harmony between humanity and their alien masters. Each operative memorized their role without knowing the full scope of the plan. Compartmentalization remained essential in a world of ubiquitous surveillance and brutal interrogation techniques that few could withstand when captured by authorities serving the oppressive alien dominance. The ceremony would feature unprecedented attendance by high-ranking legislators, the alien equivalent of their governing council, rarely seen in public and typically insulated from any potential human threat by multiple layers of security. Their participation had been announced as a special honor, evidence of Chicago's model status in accepting extraterrestrial guidance. In reality, resistance intelligence suggested a different purpose. The legislators were gathering to observe the activation of new technology in the mysterious facility beneath Sector 8, with the public ceremony serving as convenient cover for their true purpose. The coincidence of this gathering with the scheduled monitoring system reset had created a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a tactical window that Raphael believed might never come again. "This is the moment we've been waiting for," he told his eye. In a circle, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him a legend among resistance fighters. "We may not destroy their hold on Earth, but we will show them, and more importantly, show humanity, that these creatures are not gods. They can bleed, they can die. And that knowledge itself is a weapon more powerful than any technology they possess." The plan depended on Gabriel's role at the distribution center, where he had spent weeks establishing himself as an exemplary worker, one whose efficiency had earned him increasing responsibility within the facility's logistics system. On the EIO morning of the ceremony, he would implement a subtle modification to the routing algorithms, nothing dramatic enough to trigger immediate security protocols, but sufficient to create delivery delays to key checkpoints surrounding the stadium. The resulting personnel reassignments would create gaps in the security perimeter, allowing specialized resistance operatives to move explosive components through supposedly impenetrable barriers. These components, individually harmless and therefore undetectable by security scans, would be assembled on site by a team led by Eliza, whose background in pre-arrival chemical engineering had made her invaluable to resistance weapons development. The device they would construct had been designed with one purpose: to eliminate as many high-ranking legislators as possible while minimizing human casualties, a precision strike rather than indiscriminate terrorism. 2 days before the operation, Raphael himself appeared at Gabriel's housing unit during the brief window between shift end and curfew, a shock that left Gabriel momentarily speechless. His brother had changed dramatically in the 7 years since their escape from Chicago. The teenager who had helped him crawl through an access tunnel to freedom had transformed into a hardened resistance commander. His once expressive face, now a mask of controlled intensity, eyes constantly scanning for threats even in this supposedly private moment. The operation is compromised, Raphael stated without preamble. Someone talked. Security's been doubled around the stadium, and they're implementing random implant scans that can detect the blocking compound. Gabriel felt a complex mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that the suicidal plan had been aborted. Disappointment that the brief flicker of hope for striking a meaningful blow against alien oppression had been extinguished. But Raphael's next words eliminated any sense of reprieve. We're proceeding with a modified plan. Higher risk, but still viable. I need you to leave Chicago tonight. I've arranged transit to the Milwaukee zone. Gabriel refused immediately. I'm not running while you and the others sacrifice yourselves on a compromised operation, he insisted, rare anger breaking through his usually cautious demeanor. Raphael's response was equally firm. This isn't about heroics or martyrdom. The modified plan requires a surviving witness, someone who can tell the truth about what happens tomorrow when the legislators try to rewrite the narrative. Someone who carries our father's memory and can restart the resistance if we fail. He pressed a small device into Gabriel's hand, similar to, but more sophisticated than the data storage unit he'd received from Eliza. Everything's here. Safe house locations, contact protocols, contingency plans. The future of the resistance may depend on this information reaching the right people if tomorrow goes wrong. The brothers embraced briefly, an awkward gesture between men who had grown apart while fighting the same enemy in different ways, one through direct confrontation, the other through careful survival that now took on new meaning as a form of resistance itself against the totalitarian control that had transformed Earth into an alien colony. Gabriel never made it to the transport that would have taken him to Milwaukee. Halfway to the rendezvous point, he encountered a security checkpoint that shouldn't have been there, a random verification that seemed suspiciously well placed to intercept someone following his exact route. As officers examined his identification documents, Gabriel noticed a familiar figure observing from a command vehicle. William Mulligan, Chief Inspector of Counterinsurgency Operations, his reputation for ruthless efficiency in suppressing rebellion known throughout Chicago's closed zone. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and Gabriel felt a chill of recognition. Not that Mulligan knew him personally, but that the man was seeing through his carefully constructed identity to the connection with Raphael that made him valuable to both the resistance and the authorities. When the officers returned his documents with unusual politeness and allowed him to proceed, Gabriel understood he was being monitored rather than apprehended. A living link to resistance leadership being granted just enough rope to lead security. Forces to bigger targets within the insurgency against extraterrestrial oppression. The stadium erupted in chaos precisely at 2:17 p.m. the following day, not from the carefully planned resistance operation, but from something entirely unexpected. Later accounts would conflict about exactly what happened, with official reporting, claiming a technical malfunction in the ceremonial lighting systems, while resistance communications described a premature detonation triggered by heightened security measures. Whatever the cause, the explosion tore through the western section of the structure, where human officials collaborating with the alien regime had been seated alongside mid-level legislators. The human death toll was significant. 23 officials, including the chief administrator of Chicago's closed zone. But the alien casualties were limited to 2 junior legislators, far short of the strategic blow Raphael had planned against the extraterrestrial leadership. Most critically, the primary target, the gathering of high-ranking legislators scheduled to attend, had been absent, their security protocols having detected the threat in advance. The ceremony had proceeded with holographic projections rather than actual alien leadership, a fact revealed only after the resistance had expended its most carefully planned operation on empty air and digital illusions. The alien retribution began within hours, a systematically brutal response designed not just to eliminate resistance capabilities, but to extinguish even the concept of rebellion from human consciousness. Sector 12, identified through captured. Resistance members, as containing significant Phoenix operations, was subjected to complete pacification, a euphemism for the methodical execution of every third resident, regardless of age, evidence, or complicity. Public broadcast systems displayed these executions across all sectors. The message clear. The cost of resistance would be borne not just by those who actively opposed alien rule, but by the entire human population. Arrests expanded geometrically as security forces implemented Directive 937, authorizing indefinite detention based on association patterns rather than evidence of insurgent activities. Families were separated, housing blocks emptied, and thousands transported to facilities outside the closed zone for processing, a term that could mean assignment to high-risk labor details, experimental procedures, or simply efficient elimination of potentially problematic populations. The totalitarian control that had defined life under legislator rule intensified to levels previously unimaginable, demonstrating that the apparent stability of the previous years had been more restraint than limitation on the part of humanity's extraterrestrial oppressors. Gabriel watched the retribution unfold from a detention facility in Sector 4, a converted warehouse where thousands of suspects awaited processing by overworked security forces. He had been apprehended during the initial sweep, his connection to Raphael apparently still unknown. A stroke of luck explained when William Mulligan personally removed him from the general detention population on the third day. Taken to an interrogation room with surveillance equipment conspicuously disabled, Gabriel prepared himself for the sophisticated questioning techniques the chief inspector had reportedly developed for extracting information from resistance members. Instead, Mulligan spoke with unexpected directness. "Your brother survived the stadium operation, but he's being hunted across 3 sectors. I've been tasked with locating and eliminating all Phoenix leadership within the next 10 days. If I fail, the legislators will implement Directive 1200, the destruction of your entire neighborhood block as an example." He pushed a data tablet across the table displaying evacuation plans for Sector 9 where Gabriel had been living. "You have a choice to make, Mr. Drummond. Cooperate with me to locate the remaining resistance leaders, or become responsible for the deaths of 8,000 people who have the misfortune of living in proximity to your last known residence. You have 10 hours to decide." The sky burned crimson as the alien patrol ships cut through the atmosphere, their engines humming with a sound that had become the harbinger of death for many in the resistance. Gabriel pressed himself against the cold concrete wall of the abandoned subway tunnel, his breath forming small clouds in the chilly air of what was once called Boston. The alien invasion had changed everything 3 years ago, when the massive ships first appeared over major cities worldwide, establishing dominance through overwhelming technological superiority. Their totalitarian control had been swift and merciless, dividing human territories into closely monitored, closed zones where every aspect of life fell under their scrutiny. Gabriel's tracking device, mandatory for all humans, was temporarily disabled, a small act of rebellion that would mean immediate extermination if discovered. Jane's message had come through their underground network, just hours before the Resistance's boldest move yet: the sabotage of the central monitoring hub in Sector 7. The plan had worked perfectly. At first, the explosives destroying critical alien infrastructure, temporarily blinding their surveillance systems across the eastern seaboard. Gabriel had felt a surge of hope. Watching the alien technology crumble, a rare victory in the fight against extraterrestrial domination. But the alien retaliation had been swift and brutal, their forces descending upon suspected human resistance strongholds with devastating precision. The police forces, humans who collaborated with the oppressive regime, had rounded up dozens of suspected insurgents, and Gabriel had barely escaped the initial sweep, diving into the tunnel network seconds before detection. The heavy footsteps, echoing through the concrete corridor, made Gabriel's heart pound against his ribs. William Mulligan, the infamous human enforcer known for his ruthless tracking of resistance members, had found him. "Running is pointless, Gabriel." William's voice carried an unusual tone, not the typical arrogance of the regime's human puppets. "They've tagged your biometric signature. It's only a matter of time." The beam of William's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating Gabriel's face. There was no escape. The cold metal of handcuffs against his wrists felt like a final surrender as William leaned in close. "You have a choice to make," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant sound of alien crafts. "One that will determine the fate of everyone in District 12. Brought to the gleaming interrogation chamber of the alien command center, Gabriel faced the ultimatum that would haunt him forever. cooperate with the authorities in identifying resistance members, or watch as alien warships reduced his entire neighborhood to ash within 10 hours. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Hundreds of innocent lives against his loyalty to the human resistance. Gabriel's mind raced through possibilities, searching for a third option, any alternative to betrayal or mass extermination. William stood silently by the door, his expression unreadable as the alien commander. A tall, insectoid being with multiple glowing eyes waited for Gabriel's answer. "I'll help you," Gabriel finally whispered, the words feeling like acid on his tongue, each syllable a betrayal to everything he had fought for since the invasion began. The holographic display William activated showed surveillance footage of the past month, tracking movement patterns across the human quarter. "We need to identify the mastermind behind the attack," William explained, his voice clinical and detached. As the images shifted and data points connected, Gabriel felt his blood run cold. The evidence pointed to a conclusion so shocking that he initially refused to believe it. Jane, his resistance contact and trusted friend for over 2 years, had been operating a major cell right under the alien's surveillance network. Her apartment, ordinary by all appearances, sat at the nexus of resistance communication routes. Gabriel struggled to maintain his composure, not wanting to confirm the alien's suspicions, but William noticed his reaction immediately. "You know her," he stated, not a question, but a confirmation. When the alien guards left the room momentarily, William's demeanor changed entirely. Deactivating the room's monitoring systems with a small device pulled from his boot, he leaned toward Gabriel with urgency in his eyes. "Listen carefully because we don't have much time," he whispered, checking the door nervously. "Nothing is what it seems." The revelation that followed shattered Gabriel's understanding of the occupation. William Mulligan, the feared collaborator and hunter of human rebels, had been operating a deep cover operation for years. "The aliens aren't unified," he explained hurriedly, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. "There's a power struggle within their hierarchy, and I've been gathering intelligence for something bigger than a single act of sabotage." Gabriel stared in disbelief, his mind struggling to process this betrayal within a betrayal, this game of deception that had layers he never imagined. "Jane knows," William added. "She's part of it. But we needed you. We've always needed you for the final phase." As the alien guards returned, William seamlessly slipped back into his collaborator persona, roughly pulling Gabriel to his feet. "I'll continue the interrogation at the secondary facility," he informed them, with the cold efficiency that had earned him his reputation. As they walked toward the transport vehicle, Gabriel's mind raced with questions and possibilities. William had revealed just enough to completely destabilize everything Gabriel believed about the resistance and the alien occupation. If what William suggested was true, that there was a grand strategy at play, a master plan years in the making, then perhaps hope wasn't lost after all. But trusting a man who had built his life on layers of deception was a dangerous gamble, especially with the lives of an entire district hanging in the balance. As the transport door closed behind them, Gabriel made his decision. He would play along for now and watch carefully for the truth behind William's shocking revelation. The transport vehicle wound through the empty streets of what had once been downtown Chicago, now transformed into a sterile administrative sector for the alien overlords. Gabriel studied William's face for any sign of deception, any tell that might reveal whether this elaborate story was just another layer of extraterrestrial manipulation. The city beyond the tinted windows had been reconfigured to serve the needs of their oppressors. Once grand skyscrapers now housed monitoring stations that maintained constant surveillance over the human population. Armed guards, both alien and human collaborators, patrolled checkpoints between the strictly enforced closed zones that compartmentalized the remaining population. "Where are you taking me?" Gabriel finally asked, breaking the tense silence. William's eyes flicked momentarily to the vehicle's built-in tracking systems before he responded, "Somewhere we can talk freely. The real resistance isn't what you think it is." The secondary facility turned out to be an abandoned subway maintenance tunnel, its entrance concealed behind a holographic projection of a solid wall, technology that shouldn't have been available to anyone outside the alien hierarchy. As the false wall shimmered and dissolved around them, Gabriel found himself facing not just Jane, but a dozen others he recognized from different resistance cells across the city. "Welcome to the real insurgency," Jane said, stepping forward to embrace him with genuine warmth that contrasted sharply with the coldness of their surroundings. The underground chamber hummed with activity, screens displaying surveillance feeds from what appeared to be the inside of alien command centers, technology far beyond what Gabriel had seen in human hands since the invasion. William moved toward a central console, removing his enforcement officer insignia and tossing it aside. "I've been embedded with the collaborator forces for 7 years," he explained, "gathering intelligence, positioning myself, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike back against our extraterrestrial oppressors." Jane guided Gabriel through the hidden base, explaining that the sabotage operation he had participated in was merely a distraction, a small part of a much larger strategic plan. "The aliens aren't a unified force," she explained, confirming what William had hinted at earlier. "They're divided into factions, and the ruling class, the ones they call legislators, maintain control through advanced technology that makes them virtually immortal." On screen after screen, Gabriel saw evidence of a resistance network far more sophisticated than he had imagined possible under such totalitarian control. Maps detailed alien installations across the globe, each marked with vulnerabilities and strategic importance. The scale of the operation was breathtaking, spanning continents and involving thousands of operatives, many of whom had infiltrated the highest levels of the alien administration. "How did you manage all this without detection?" Gabriel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Their tracking systems monitor everything." William joined them, carrying what looked like an ordinary metal briefcase. "Because they're arrogant," he said simply. "They believe their technology is infallible, that their domination is complete, and human resistance is merely a nuisance to be crushed. That blindness is their greatest weakness." He placed the case on a table and opened it carefully, revealing a device unlike anything Gabriel had seen before, a pulsing crystalline sphere nested in a complex mechanical housing. "This is their downfall," William continued, a hint of pride in his voice. "A perfect retaliatory weapon developed by integrating their own technology against them. 10 years of work, countless sacrifices, all leading to this moment." The sphere seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an unsettling visual effect that made Gabriel's eyes hurt if he looked at it too long. "It's some kind of bomb?" he asked, already knowing the answer but hoping he was wrong. Jane shook her head. "Not exactly. It's more elegant than that. It targets the quantum entanglement network the legislators use to maintain their consciousness across multiple bodies. One activation, and the entire command structure collapses simultaneously." The plan they laid out over the next few hours was audacious beyond anything Gabriel could have imagined. A coordinated global rebellion triggered by the activation of William's device. Representatives from resistance cells worldwide joined, via secure communications, each confirming readiness for the offensive that would follow the legislators' collapse. "The aliens will be thrown into disarray," William explained, tracing attack vectors on the holographic display. "Without the legislators to maintain order, the lower castes will fight among themselves, creating the chaos we need to push them off our planet." Gabriel felt both awe and terror at the scale of what they proposed, a revolution that would either liberate humanity or lead to its final extermination. "And you're sure this will work?" he asked, the weight of billions of lives making his voice tremble slightly. William and Jane exchanged a look that contained volumes of shared history before William answered, "Nothing is certain, but this is the moment everything has been building toward." The aliens made one critical mistake when they conquered Earth. They underestimated human determination. When the time came, Gabriel found himself standing beside William in the heart of the alien legislative chamber, both disguised as maintenance workers with access to the environmental controls. The legislators, tall, ethereal beings whose bodies seemed partially transparent, revealing complex patterns of light where organs should be, floated above the assembly floor, dictating new restrictions on human movement between zones. Their Voices resonated with harmonic overtones that made Gabriel's teeth ache, a reminder of their fundamentally alien nature. William worked with mechanical precision, installing the device within the chamber's ventilation system where it would be virtually invisible to the aliens' scanning technology. 30 seconds, he whispered, activating the countdown sequence. Once this begins, there's no stopping it. Gabriel found himself thinking of all the lives lost in the long struggle against extraterrestrial oppression. Friends executed during the initial invasion, family members who had disappeared into alien processing facilities, never to return. The sacrifice and suffering that had led to this moment of potential liberation. For Earth, he whispered, a sentiment that felt simultaneously inadequate and all-encompassing. The device activated with neither sound nor visible effect. Its impact manifested only in the sudden stillness of the legislators, their luminous bodies freezing mid-motion as the quantum network that sustained them collapsed. For one breathless moment, nothing happened. Then chaos erupted. Alarms blared throughout the complex as lower-caste aliens realized something catastrophic had occurred to their leadership. William grabbed Gabriel's arm, pulling him toward the prearranged escape route as the first explosions rocked the building, coordinated strikes by resistance cells targeting critical infrastructure. "It's begun," William said, his voice tight with emotion. Relief, fear, and vindication all mingled together. Outside, the night sky lit up with firefights between alien security forces and humans emerging from hiding, armed with weapons stockpiled, over years of patient preparation. Across global communications channels, reports flooded in of similar uprisings in Moscow, Beijing, London, and 100 other cities worldwide. The human retaliation had begun in earnest, a wave of rebellion, sweeping across a planet that had endured years of brutal extraterrestrial totalitarianism. 3 days later, standing atop the ruins of what had once been an alien detention center, Gabriel watched human fighters secure the perimeter against increasingly disorganized alien counterattacks. The revolution was far from complete. Pockets of alien resistance remained, particularly among the military castes who operated semi-independently from the now-defunct legislators. But for the first time since the invasion, humanity held the upper hand, pushing back against their oppressors with a ferocity born from years of subjugation. Jane joined him on the rooftop, her arm in a makeshift sling from an injury sustained during the initial uprising. "William wants to see you," she said, gesturing toward a command post established in what had once been an alien monitoring station. "We're picking up transmissions from their fleet in orbit. They're in disarray, but they're regrouping." Gabriel nodded, taking one last look at the horizon where the silhouettes of destroyed alien craft dotted the landscape like fallen giants. The future of humanity remained uncertain, balanced on a knife's edge between hard-won freedom and the threat of renewed extraterrestrial domination. But something fundamental had changed. The myth of alien invincibility had been shattered forever. As he descended toward the command center, Gabriel felt the weight of the role he would play in the continuing struggle, knowing that the revolution had only just begun, but carrying within him a spark of hope that had been absent for far too long. And there you have it, humanity's darkest hour transformed into its greatest triumph. But what happens next in this struggle? Will Gabriel and William's alliance hold against the remaining alien forces? And what about the orbital fleet that's regrouping for what could be the final battle for Earth? The answers might surprise you. Look to your right now. Our next video explores the shocking truth about the aliens' original dimension and the terrifying reason they invaded Earth in the first place. Was it really about conquering humanity? Or is there something even more sinister behind their arrival? The revelation will change everything you thought you knew about this conflict. Did you ever wonder what happened to the humans who willingly collaborated with the aliens from the beginning? Their story is more complex and more chilling than you might imagine. Comment below with your theories about what drove humans to betray their own kind. Are we really so different from those collaborators? If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who appreciates deep, thought-provoking sci-fi that puts humanity's resilience front and center. Don't miss a single chapter in this epic saga. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you'll be first to know when we upload our next installment. The fight for Earth's future continues, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.